The weather is going to continue to stay very active across the United States over the next several days, and this is going to continue to bring more rounds of severe storms, including damaging winds, large hail, and tornadoes to parts of the United States. And we're also watching a tropical disturbance that might become a tropical storm off the coast of Florida as we go into this weekend. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about the weather pattern over the next several days and why the severe weather will probably be pretty significant between now and Thursday. We are going to begin though first with what's happening across the United States right now, as we always do, and right now the weather has been pretty active, at least over the last 12 to 24 hours. We had a pretty large area of thunderstorm activity blow up late last night across parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. This did lead to a couple of tornadoes yesterday. We had one actually very late last night in southwest Ohio, happened around 1 or so in the morning, and there were actually a couple of areas of rotation there, but we did end up having at least one radar confirmed tornado. We also had a radar confirmed tornado a little bit earlier into the evening hours back over in eastern Indiana. But the good news is that the majority of this storm activity is moving into Tennessee and Kentucky, where it is beginning to weaken out, which means our next round of storms is only just behind it. We are going to be watching for another line of storms late this morning into the afternoon develop across parts of Iowa, and eventually that'll move through Missouri and Illinois, where another swath of damaging winds will be possible today, and as well as the potential for a couple of tornadoes. And eventually, as we go into Wednesday, we're going to have another reassurance of severe weather across the northern central plains and even the Midwest, where a couple more lines of thunderstorms will be possible on Wednesday. And I would not completely rule out something like a, significant MCS or even maybe a derecho as we go into one of these 2 days. I don't think today we're going to see one, but tomorrow there's definitely slightly higher chance that we see something like that. Back over in New England, we do have a low pressure system still spinning up there. There's a little subtropical low that has brought some cloud cover and a few showers up there. Back down in Florida, pretty typical storm activity for this time of the year. Tropics are pretty quiet, at least across much of the Gulf of Mexico and the very far western Atlantic Ocean, but we do have a tropical wave all the way back over off your screen, all the way back over east of the Lesser Antilles that will eventually approach Florida as we go into the weekend, and that might become a weak tropical storm, and then it should go up the east coast of the United States as something pretty weak. And overall, not too concerned about that, but we'll talk more about that near the end of the forecast. I do want to give you a quick rundown of the synoptic overview for severe weather for the next few days and why we'll be seeing severe weather. It all begins with the ridge that we have back down in the southern plains in the upper levels. That is allowing for a northwesterly flow across parts of the central and northern plains and as well as the Midwest. That is going to allow for complexes of thunderstorms to develop, basically leading to lines of thunderstorms. We're going to be seeing that today. We're going to be seeing that tomorrow. And then eventually, as we go into Thursday, we could see something similar to that back over in parts of the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, with more damaging winds being a possibility. And once we go into Friday into Saturday, the good news is that this ridge will move back to the west. That should kind of alleviate that severe weather risk overall by the weekend, and that'll eventually lead to some troughing back over in the northeastern part of the country, and that actually could grab that tropical disturbance and maybe race it up the east coast, depending on the timing. But overall, this ridge is going to bring warmer and drier weather to a large chunk of the Rocky Mountains and even parts of the Great Plains as we go into the weekend, and this weather pattern will be sticking around pretty much all throughout next week. Now, we are going to be dealing with another big severe weather event both today and tomorrow, and it covers a large area. The good news right now is that the risk isn't super high, but it is obviously a risk that's notable, where we'll be seeing damaging winds and perhaps even a couple or a few tornadoes. So for today, which is tossing trampolines on Tacos Tuesday, we have two slight risks for severe weather. We have one in South and North Dakota, the other which goes from Iowa and Nebraska back into Tennessee and Georgia. The main concern overall with both areas will be the threat for damaging winds. So notice the damaging wind threat in both of those areas. We also have a hatched damaging wind risk in both Iowa, Illinois, and northeast Missouri, where we could see damaging winds exceed 70 miles per hour today, meaning that you should be prepared today. Make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts and take the proper precautions, especially if you're in that area. The tornado risk today, for the time being, is a large 2% tornado risk. I personally don't think today's tornado risk is going to be much different from yesterday. Wednesday, I honestly think it's going to be pretty much the same threat, where we might have a couple of tornadoes, and that's really about it. Overall, it's another large tornado risk, though, when it comes to just the square mileage that it covers. It goes from Tennessee all the way back into Wisconsin and Minnesota, and another small 2% tornado risk in North Dakota. Going into wacky weather Wednesday, the weather is definitely going to get a little bit wacky. We have another large area for severe weather, anywhere again from even down into Texas, which is not something you see very often at the end of July, all the way back into Minnesota. The main area that we're going to be watching for is this slight risk, which goes from Kansas back into Iowa and Minnesota, where all modes of severe weather will be possible, but the main concern being damaging winds. And then there is going to be at least a low tornado risk, but I would not be surprised if we see some sort of 5% tornado risk get introduced in the next outlook, so something to keep in mind. Now, today's severe weather setup when it comes to timing is going to be very tricky to forecast, and honestly, when you're watching this forecast, we might actually see storms already out there, but right now the latest HRRR model run in this forecast is going to be showing storms firing up around lunchtime or so, and as long as that does happen, this forecast is pretty much going to be on pace for what we're going to see today. But with that said, the tornado risk for today will be predominantly across central and southeast Iowa during the very late morning into the early afternoon, and eventually as we go later into the afternoon, that line of storms will move down to the southeast across Illinois, where there will still be a low tornado risk, but it should still be pretty close to zero. It's not going to be very high by any means. We might see a couple of discrete cells trying to refire in Iowa later today as well. We might see an isolated tornado threat develop out of that too, so just something to keep in mind. Here's what the timing looks like for today. So the HRRR model again showing right around lunchtime or so, storms starting to fire up in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa. And then as we go throughout the afternoon, this organizes kind of into a cluster of storms. It doesn't really look that organized, but as we get closer to 2 to 3 o'clock, I think this really becomes more of a Boeing segment with mostly a scattered to numerous damaging wind risk across parts of Iowa. And then as we go later into the afternoon, closer to dinner time, storms will be pretty much just again bowing out. This should be mostly a wind threat here, maybe an isolated hail or wind event back over in southern Wisconsin or northern Illinois, and then we might see some reinitiation back over in southern central Iowa with maybe an isolated tornado risk or hail risk, but overall the risk should stay low there. And as we go later into the evening, this line will continue to push south, producing again mostly a wind threat across other areas like southern Illinois and as well as Kentucky. Now the timing down in the Ohio Valley is going to be very contingent on when this line of storms fires up today, but pending if it does develop during the around lunchtime or so or just after that, we'll probably see storms rumbling across parts of southern Illinois, southern Indiana, and eventually Kentucky as we go into the late afternoon and eventually into the evening hours, and that should eventually fall apart as we go into the overnight hours across parts of Kentucky and northern Tennessee. I would ignore this reinitiation that the NAM3K model is showing. I don't think that's going to happen, but this would be the main event right here in southern Illinois and southern Indiana later today. Back over in the northern plains for today, a few storms will fire up. Most of these will just be hail and wind events, maybe an isolated tornado, and then as we go into the overnight hours, things start to clear out there. Now, once we go into Wednesday, things could get pretty dicey on Wednesday. We could see a pretty big day of severe weather on Wednesday. It's very possible. Right now, the tornado parameter values for Wednesday really are the highest back over in parts of the central plains, like, Nebraska, for example, or even western Iowa, where there will be more shear, a better environment overall for the potential for maybe even a couple of tornadoes. So that'll be something to watch for. But I think overall for Wednesday, we are going to be watching for lines of thunderstorms. The HRRR model showing a pretty big cluster of storms developing in South Dakota just after lunchtime, and as we go into the afternoon, this continues to move east into Minnesota and as well as parts of northeast Nebraska as predominantly a wind threat. Back over in the central plains, kind of the same sort of story where we just see a huge line of storms erupt as we get past about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and eventually by 6 to 7, this is just a full-blown line of storms with scattered to numerous damaging winds and perhaps even a couple of embedded tornadoes. We're going to talk more details on this probably if we go live today. We'll talk more about this in our stream, or we'll have another video for you tomorrow morning on this to break it down for you more in detail. Now, the tropics are not super active, but we do have one area of development that will be heading towards the United States. Right now, it has a medium chance of developing, and this right now is, again, back over in parts of the western Atlantic Ocean. It will move into the Lesser Antilles over the next couple of days, and it will eventually try to intensify as it moves closer to Florida. It, again, has a medium chance of developing as of right now. This is what the European model is showing in terms of the track and how intense this could get as we go into the weekend. So by Thursday into Friday, not really much yet, but by Saturday Saturday into Sunday, we'll likely have that tropical wave approaching Florida. Showers, some gusty winds, and higher wave heights all possible, but as of now, it's only forecasted to become something relatively weak like a tropical depression or storm. Now, if this can pull out with Bermuda high and really stay just offshore, this could intensify quite a bit, but if it stays closer to the coast, I don't anticipate much intensification out of this. So as we go into Monday into Tuesday, the European model has this kind of flirting up and down the east coast of the United States. Really doesn't intensify much though. It'd be mostly just a flooding threat right along the coastline if it's even that close. So right now, I'm not super concerned about this, but it is still something we'll be watching for, maybe for a flooding threat and maybe even a low-end tornado risk in maybe North Carolina. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below, subscribe if you've not already.